What if the company that invented digital photography went bankrupt because of digital photography? What if the chip that erased a $30 billion empire was built by their own engineer, in their own lab, with their own money? And what if that engineer walked into a boardroom, showed the future to a room full of executives, and the only response he got was, "That's cute. Don't tell anyone about it." This isn't a story about a company that missed the future. This is a story about a company that built the future, patented it, led it for a decade, and then made a deliberate, repeated choice not to live in it. That choice cost them everything. To understand how far Kodak fell, you first have to understand how untouchable they once were. By 1976, Kodak controlled 90% of the film market and 85% of camera sales in the United States. Not 50%, not 60%, 90%. George Eastman built the model in the late 1800s on one simple philosophy. You press the button, we do the rest. Sell cheap cameras, make a fortune on film. It was the razor and blades playbook before anyone had a name for it, and it worked for nearly a century. Kodak wasn't just a camera company. It was the infrastructure of human memory. Weddings, birthdays, wars, moon landings. By 1996, they were pulling in $16 billion a year, with film margins between 70 and 80%. At their peak in 1997, market cap touched $31 billion, and somewhere inside that empire, a 24-year-old engineer was quietly building the thing that would erase it all. His name was Steve Sasson. In 1974, his supervisor handed him a Fairchild semiconductor chip and told him to see if he could do anything interesting with it. Over the next year, using a movie camera lens, an analog-to-digital converter, a dozen memory chips, and a cassette recorder, Sasson built the first digital camera in history. It weighed 8 pounds and took 23 seconds to capture a single 100 DAO 100 pixel image. On December 12, 1975, Sasson walked into a Kodak boardroom and showed the executives the future. Their response was immediate. "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." To be fair, the tech wasn't market ready. Sasson himself said digital would need roughly 2 million pixels to match film, and 15 to 20 years to get there. Kodak patented the invention anyway, filing in 1977 and receiving the patent in 1978. But here's where it turns darker. In 1979, a Kodak executive wrote an internal report forecasting exactly how digital would erode the film market, year by year, through 2010. 2 years later, after Sony unveiled the Mavica electronic camera, Kodak commissioned a massive internal study asking one question: is digital a real threat? The conclusion was unambiguous. Digital will replace film, and you have roughly 10 years to prepare. A full decade of warning from Kodak's own research. What did they do with it? Almost nothing. Because those 70 to 80% film margins made it irrational to invest in a technology that would cannibalize the business keeping the lights on. This is what Clayton Christensen would later call the innovator's dilemma, and Kodak was about to become its most devastating case study in business history. There's a hidden chapter almost no one covers. In 1986, Kodak engineers built the world's first megapixel CCD sensor. In 1987, a classified U.S. government client asked Kodak's Federal Systems Division to build a covert digital camera, something that could operate where a film camera would draw too much attention. A skunkworks team built it into a modified Canon body, with the electronics hidden inside a shoulder bag. Only one unit was ever built, hand-delivered to the client and never seen again. The agency remains classified to this day. This prototype became the direct ancestor of the DCS-100, the world's first commercial DSLR, launched publicly in 1991. So by the early 90s, Kodak had invented digital photography, built a spy camera for the government, and led the professional digital market. Their own executives had warned them film was dying. Yet in 1989, when Kodak's CEO retired, the board chose between two successors, a vice chairman with a deep appreciation for digital technology, and a man who'd spent 36 years in the film business. They picked film. The digital advocate resigned and went on to run Sun Microsystems, then Cray Research, building his legacy in the exact world Kodak refused to enter. Through the mid-1990s, Kodak was at war with itself. Its professional digital camera line was genuinely world-class. The DCS-460, released in 1995, was the highest-resolution digital camera on the planet, and one even flew aboard the space shuttle. But the film division still controlled the budget and culture, and every major decision was filtered through one question: how does this protect film? The clearest example was the Kodak Advantix. In 1996, Kodak spent $500 million developing it. The Advantix had a digital sensor inside, let you preview shots on a small screen and let you pick how many prints per frame. Here's the catch. It still required film, still required a trip to a photo lab, still required paying for physical prints. Kodak had built a digital camera and deliberately crippled it to protect film. Consumers asked the obvious question, if it's digital, why do I still need film? Kodak wrote off nearly the entire investment. Then came the cruelest twist of all. In 2001, Kodak finally committed to the consumer digital camera market with real conviction, and by 2005, something almost surreal happened. Kodak became the #1 digital camera brand in the United States, holding 21.3% of the market against Canon and Sony's 17.7% each. The company that invented digital photography had finally conquered the digital camera market, and they were losing $60 on every single camera they sold. There was no ecosystem, no film, no chemicals, no recurring revenue, just a brutal race to the bottom in a hardware category where they had no structural advantage. They'd won a battle that mathematically could not be won. Between 2004 and 2011, Kodak posted losses in nearly every single quarter. Their last real weapon was a forgotten patent portfolio, over 1,000 digital imaging patents. In the mid-2000s, they weaponized it, suing Apple and RIM, licensing to Samsung and LG for roughly $964 million. But 2 weeks before a critical 2012 patent auction, the U.S. International Trade Commission ruled a core Kodak patent invalid. A portfolio once valued at $2.6 billion suddenly collapsed. On January 19, 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, $5.1 billion in assets against $6.8 billion in debt. Stock that had traded near $95 a share at its 1997 peak closed at 65 cents that December, a loss of over 99% in 14 years. That same month, Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Samsung bought over 21,000 of Kodak's patents for $525 million, pennies on the dollar, paid to the companies whose industries were built on Kodak's foundation. Kodak emerged from bankruptcy in 2013 as a commercial printing company. The Rochester, New York workforce that once employed tens of thousands contracted to just a few thousand. The lesson isn't that Kodak was stupid or blind. It's more uncomfortable than that. Kodak saw the future coming. They wrote internal memos about it. They built the technology themselves. They filed the patents. They led the professional market for an entire decade. They even reached #1 in consumer sales. But the very thing that made Kodak powerful, those 70 to 80% film margins, made it economically rational in every short-term budget meeting to delay, dilute, and quietly defund every meaningful digital initiative they launched. The Advantix wasn't an accident. It was the perfectly logical output of a company whose institutional survival instincts were wired to protect the film business at any cost. Kodak isn't a one-off story. History is full of companies that saw the future coming, built the technology themselves, and still couldn't escape the gravity of what made them successful in the first place. If this kind of story is what you're into, there's a lot more where this came from on the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.